It's AM 650's The Law Show, a comprehensive look at everything you need to know about the law. Now, here's Sterling Fox.
Well, hello and welcome to The Law Show here on AM 650. On the program today, we're back with the family law category. We're looking at all of the issues surrounding divorce and separation, including disclosure requirements, real estate, pensions, companies, a host of issues to discuss. And I'm really pleased to have back in studio with us from Lindsay Kenney LLP, Angela Thiel, who is a partner at Lindsay Kenney. Nice to see you again.
Nice to see you.
And with us, a return appearance from Christine Eilers, who is also at Lindsay Kenney in general litigation. Nice to see you again, Christine.
Nice to see you too.
General litigation. That sounds like a jack of all trades sort of category, and yet you're here with us to talk family law for the second time. So, in fact, even though it says general litigation, you do mostly family law, don't you?
I do, yes. Probably about 75% family law.
And is most of the family law work tied up with these items that I've just described, this whole divorce and separation? Is that what the bulk of family law is comprised of, Christine?
I would say that is what the bulk of family law is couples separating and needing to figure out how to divide their assets, what to do with the children, things like that.
Angela, one thing that you've reminded us of in the past, talking about family law, when people call you up at Lindsay Kenney and say, "Oh, I've had it. This is it. It's over. We're heading in opposite directions," you're inclined to try as often as possible to take the emotion out of these declarations and ask the person on the other end of the phone questions like, "Are you serious? Do you realize the implications of this decision?" Because it really is a dramatic, life-changing call to make, isn't it?
That's correct. I mean, we both ethically, and part of our ethics are we have to discuss reconciliation.
Right.
But I suppose morally is the wrong word, but it is kind of moral. It's the idea of people just go, "Oh, I'm just going to do this. I've had this fight."
Right.
And I just feel both ethically and morally, well, okay, let's stop and think about it. Have you tried counseling? How serious was this fight? How will your life change? Take a little bit of time. I'm not going to rush into court today for you.
Right.
Take a little bit of time and tell me what's been going on. And I just think that's the right thing to do. And sometimes people do sort of settle down and say, yeah, maybe we should have some counseling.
Right. And is the decision to reconsider, not necessarily to reconcile, but at least to reconsider the inflamed emotional decision to, that's it, I'm out of here. The decision to just back away from that is in part due to an assessment of exactly what's at stake in the relationship, Christine. There's everything you own is suddenly on the table.
Yeah, a sober second thought is necessary sometimes when you look at how what your situation's going to be at the end of the day when your assets are split, when spousal support's determined, when all that sort of comes out, you might want to reconsider.
And the children.
And the children.
I mean, what keeps a lot of people in a marriage is thinking about what is this going to do to our kids.
Absolutely, sure.
So that's, I find more people reconsider because of the kids, because they're going to homes,
Yep.
Having to sell this house and move down in the market, all of those things. But if you can keep a marriage together, a decent enough marriage that's having some problems, it's usually better for the kids. If you can't, then at least don't start it being angry, because you'll carry that anger over, and the conflict's not good for the kids. There's an old saying that says, divorce itself's not terrible for kids. Conflict in a divorce is terrible for kids.
Exactly, yeah. And I suppose then, but then you hear the other side of the story. You talked about if it's a decent enough marriage to carry forward, then it's worth the effort. Then you also hear stories of, well, this really has been over for a long time, but we're really hanging in there for the sake of the children. How much fun can that household be for those kids to be living in?
I don't know. It sounds like my house some days. Marriage is hard work.
It absolutely is. It absolutely is.
So I think that people go through stages in marriage that, sometimes they're not all that happy. But it's amazing how many people I've seen, come back to a situation where, after the financial pressures are off, or maybe there's a problem with one of the kids, those things go away and the couple can reconnect.
Right.
But if you're gonna end it, end it in a civilized, amicable fashion if you can.
Be grown-ups if possible.
Do the best for your kids if possible.
Right, okay. Now, when we're talking about this whole matter of division of assets after that call gets made and, okay, we're going our separate ways, the automatic assumption, maybe it's because we watch too much American television, but the automatic assumption, I think, for most people is, well, everything's just going to get split 50-50 and that's it. We'll walk away with half of whatever there is and life goes on. Is that the case? Is it automatically half and half? Is that, or is that, I'm again watching too many shows based in Los Angeles where California law says that's the way it goes.
Yeah. Well, to some extent, that's true. Under the new law, which isn't applying to everybody yet, you'll get half of everything that's there, less whatever somebody came in with, or less an inheritance, or certain types of excluded property. But for most long-term couples, it is pretty much 50-50 most of the time.
Now, I wanted to ask you about this because it's all over the papers. It's this big, splashy American couple, speaking of California, Bruce Jenner and what's her name, Kardashian, that he's been married to for 20-odd years, are splitting up. There's an estate. There's a mutual accumulated wealth of about $125 million. They did not have a prenup. Angela, how important is a prenup, even if you don't have millions and gabillions of dollars when you start out in the first place?
Well, a prenup, when a couple starts out and they're just out of university and they're just building up together, a prenup is not necessary.
Right, because if you're lucky, you own a used car.
Exactly.
That's it.
And you have a bunch of student loan debt.
That's right, yeah.
But if you come into a marriage in your 30s with a condo, a pension plan, an RRSP, mom and dad are going to give you a $50,000 to $100,000 down payment, and it's going to come from one set of parents.
Right.
You do want a prenuptial because at this point, as we've said before in shows, we have a new act that says what you come in with or what your parents give you is considered to be yours. So as you're mixing and mingling funds going into a marriage, you're going to want to demonstrate that this is what I came in with.
Oh, I see. Okay, because that is excluded from that 50-50 split that Christine, you and I spoke about a moment ago. So a prenup, and I think we've mentioned this before, it may be a very practical legal thing to do, but it's dreadfully unromantic.
It's not fun. It's not fun.
But I guess, though, it's part of the information exchange that everyone should have if you're contemplating marriage, which used to mean spending the rest of your lives together, but perhaps the sharing of information about goals and ambitions and all of that sort of thing might want to include some discussion of finances. And it is absolutely astonishing how little discussion of finances occurs in the lead up to a marriage, to a lot of marriages, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
Well, one of the messages that we wanted to provide to your people, because I also do some estate litigation, is there are still millions of people out there who really don't know what they have, or one spouse is controlling things, or they just sort of say, well, I don't really want to know about it. It's not fair to say controlling, but I've run into women who say to me, I just didn't want to be bothered. It made my head hurt when he talked about money.
Right, exactly, right. Or the other side, from the guy's perspective, and I hear this from guys I know all the time. Well, I'm just going out, I'm just killing myself doing my work.
Yeah.
I bring it home and I just give it to her, and that's the end of it. I don't even want to know many details. So either way, on either side of that equation, Angela, there's one individual who's not particularly involved in the loot,
which is a bit scary.
And I've said coming into this that I am sure, I don't know if there's this sort of National Bank of Canada list of people's bank accounts that have been sort of dormant for 10 years. And you go online and look and see if you've got a bank account that's sitting there. My brother just found out that he had $16,000 in a bank account in Toronto that he'd forgotten about. It was part of it. He got a student loan when he was going to university in Toronto. He'd forgotten about it.
What a nice surprise.
Yeah.
It's like finding a 20 in your pocket.
So, but the problem is someone dies, and these people that go, well, I'll go to this corner bank this year to get my RRSP, and then maybe I'll go over here next year to get my RRSP.
Right.
Or, I'll just put bunch of money over here. It's like a vacation fund, and they forget the wife's, husband never is going to find it.
Right.
So people coming into divorce, and sometimes what happens is you come in and they talk about a divorce and you say, well, why don't we start with, do you know what you have?
Right.
And sometimes you can keep people together by giving one of the parties a little bit more control over what's going on in the finances of their marriage, because they'll, that's usually an irritant.
Right. Well, I was about to ask you that, in terms of, lacking certain important bits of information. If you're at that point in your relationship where both of you sort of mutually agreed that it's over, okay, oh boy, all right then, well, gosh, I better start finding out what exactly it is I'm separating from and what my entitlements might be. And I really don't have much of a clue as to what's going on there. What remedies, Christine, are available to me, the partner without the equal knowledge of what's going on financially?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I would say to start by being an investigator in your own home. Try to figure out, as Angela says, what you have, what your liabilities are. I think Angela suggested doing a credit report check on yourself. Try and find out if you're liable for a bunch of loans that you didn't realize you signed on for, because that happens.
Okay.
Well, and a lot of people don't realize you can go online. Equifax is the leading credit reporting
agency. And TransUnion, the other one, right?
Yeah. And you can ask them for a personal credit report. And I don't think they charge very much. But what happens is, you may have signed on a credit card which you didn't know about.
Right.
There's lots of people an awful lot of people out there that have credit balances at the furniture stores, the brick.
Oh, sure.
Right.
And
which they're usually paying an awful lot of interest
Yeah.
on. But it also will show you if there's bank accounts that have made inquiries or bankers that have made inquiries about you. And if you think, well, I've never had anything to do with that bank,
Right.
sometimes that will tell you your spouse has taken out a loan in that bank, and you're jointly responsible for your spouse's debts. So
Even if you didn't co-sign it physically?
Under the new Family Law Act, correctly, you can be responsible for debts you didn't know anything about.
Wow, that's a little frightening, isn't it?
It's
So
very
it
much so.
becomes even more urgent then, if indeed you've reached that fork in the road where the relationship is not going to continue. And then there's a need to, first of all, inform yourself before the actual process of retaining a lawyer and going through the separation and ultimately divorce. When does the lawyer get involved, Angela? When should people, having hit that fork in the road, okay, it's over, I know that, I can feel it, we're done. So when should that call to the lawyer get made?
Well, when you've got as much information as you can possibly gather,
Okay.
that's a good time to call the lawyer.
Right, because then you can have a conversation that's useful to the lawyer because you've got tons of information, right?
But the other time is when you see something changing drastically and you're thinking, what's happening with my assets? I actually had a case where a woman came in the door that morning and said, I found out that my husband is selling one of our investment properties, and looking through our drawers, I see that he's sent a couple $100,000 to his brothers in California already.
Right.
And this house...
Get the money offshore.
Yeah,
right?
and this house apparently is selling today. So between 10 o'clock and about 2 o'clock, we were in court. We got an order that the money from, that was coming from the sales proceeds was paid into our firm and trust, so that we kept the money. Now, whether that was the right thing to do in terms of the ultimate acrimony, it might happen, but it's kind of like, well, if you don't do it and the money goes someplace, well, you can't get it back.
You can't. That was my next question. Whether it's California, which is a much more familiar jurisdiction, or somewhere in Europe or Asia, once the money leaves Canada, it's gone and cannot be retrieved. Is that the case?
Well, it can't be retrieved. It can be retrieved in if you put it someplace else, like if it's in a house you bought in California.
Okay.
There are reciprocating jurisdictions in the United States, but anywhere else is a bit of a difficulty.
Huh?
Yeah, and it's kind of like, do you have enough here that even if that goes offshore, you can get what's here? Because the problem is, you're sort of saying, well, do you know what you have? If this goes over there, do you know whether you've got enough left here to make up for it? And if they don't, then you better retrieve the money before it goes offshore.
And you were able, in this particular instance, to freeze the proceeds of that house and at least keep them at home for future consideration, right?
I was standing in the lineup after I was in front of the judge, phoned my office, said, I've got the order, phone the notary, because normally the checks go out about 3 o'clock, phone the notary and tell them I've got the order.
Right.
My partner did so. The notary called their internal, their counsel, and we had the check in our hands, within a very short period of time. But that check would have been given to the husband probably about 3 o'clock that day.
Right.
And we managed to keep it.
Christine, what happens, and I've heard this, not terribly recent, but an example of the fight occurs. That fight, the last straw fight, right? So then one member of the pair leaves the house. The next morning, the other person in the couple goes to the bank and empties the joint bank account. Before, you could still be sleeping it off if you had an inflamed night before. And by the time you actually come to your senses, you've got no money left in your joint bank account. Are you just out? Too bad. Ha ha. Beat you to the bank. How does that work?
Well, the type of order that Angela was talking about is something that you might want to get very early on if it's the type of situation where something like that could happen. And an asset restraining order is a very common order in a family law matter right at the beginning if you think that your spouse is going to start draining your accounts or moving real estate or doing whatever they're going to do.
It seems to be fairly common practice. It's the first punch you can throw. I'm wiping out that joint account. And whoever gets there first gets the dough.
Yeah, well, you hope that there's other assets that can be distributed to account for it, or that they've moved it somewhere else into, another type of asset that you can trace. But it can be difficult when people do things like that.
Well, I find it's worse. It's not so bad when it's the money in the joint bank account. It's when they go and bang up the joint line of credit to its limit.
Right.
And that's more common. There might be a $75,000 line of credit, joint names, and, off they go to say, well, I don't trust you not to take all this money, so I'm going to take all this money.
And go to Vegas.
Well, if you're lucky. If you're lucky, it's not go to Vegas.
But either way, there's a paper trail. I mean, you are, if you're withdrawing funds and depositing them somewhere else, you can track all of this. And ultimately, does that become part of the work of the lawyers in these cases, Angela? Tracking, well, wait a second, he just ran up my line of credit to the max and emptied the bank account. I want some of that back. I mean, I didn't expect either of those tactics.
Well, it is the work, but sometimes you tell people, look, the creditor doesn't care if he took the money. If he's gone, bye-bye, you're going to be responsible for it.
Right.
And frankly, most of the people that are really the bad actors that think they're going to leave a marriage and they don't want their wife to know, they've slowly been draining out money, and the wife may have, and it's not fair sometimes to say the wife, because I suppose it isn't always men doing this, it's sometimes women doing this, but if you don't pay attention to your finances, it's going to be much easier for you to be cheated and tricked by, your intimate partner.
A big part of what we're trying to accomplish here on The Law Show every Sunday on AM 650 is information and education. And we're just really pleased to have Christine Eilers and Angela Thiel from Lindsay Kenney LLP with us on this edition of The Law Show. We're talking family law, and there's an awful lot of this conversation still ahead. Stay with us.
There's more of the show still ahead. This is AM 650's The Law Show.